Buenos Aires, April 15, 1976. 2 a.m. Jacobo Timerman is sitting at his desk. In front of him, a cup of coffee that has long gone cold. In his hand, a pen. He is writing. Jacobo is a journalist, the owner of the newspaper La Opinion. He is not a soldier. He is not a communist guerrilla. He is just a man who believes that words have power. His front door is kicked in. 6 men in olive green uniforms pour into the room. They are not wearing rank insignia. They are not carrying arrest warrants. Their faces are hidden behind black cloth masks or dark sunglasses in the middle of the night. They do not scream. That is the most terrifying part. They work with a quiet, bureaucratic efficiency. One of them presses the cold steel barrel of a rifle against Jacobo's forehead. "Jacobo Timerman," he asks. His voice is flat, completely devoid of emotion. Jacobo nods. "You are under arrest," the man says. "Take him." Jacobo Timerman was one of 30,000 people who disappeared in Argentina that year. But he was not alone. In the exact same year, in Chile, in Uruguay, in Paraguay, in Bolivia, in Brazil, thousands of other people experienced the exact same thing. The smashed door, the black mask, the bureaucratic silence, and then nothingness. They were not killed at random. They were not killed by isolated, rogue regimes. They were killed by a network, a coordinated system that crossed borders, crossed oceans, and operated outside the law, outside of morality, and outside the view of history. A system that had a name. Operation Condor. And what you are about to learn in the next hour is not just a history lesson about Latin American dictatorships. This is the story of how a template was created. A blueprint for how democracy is murdered, not by open invasion, but by shadows. And the most terrifying part? That blueprint is still in use today. To understand how a killing machine is built, you cannot start with the blood. You must start with the ideology. We have to go back to the 1950s and 1960s. The Cold War is heating up. And in Washington, D.C., the architects of American foreign policy are drafting a new doctrine. The National Security Doctrine. Under this doctrine, a state is no longer defined by its borders on a map. A state is defined by its ideology. The enemy is no longer just a foreign army crossing a border. The enemy is anyone on the inside. A university student protesting bus fares. A teacher teaching Marxist theory. A journalist like Jacobo Timerman who asks too many questions. They are no longer citizens with a dissenting opinion. They are a cancer inside the body of the nation. And cancer must be cut out. This ideology was not born in the university lecture halls of Buenos Aires or Santiago. It was imported, taught, injected. In Panama, there was a place, the School of the Americas. This is where the best and brightest officers from Latin America were sent to learn. They learned counterinsurgency tactics. They learned intelligence gathering. and they learned how to make people disappear. CIA interrogation manuals, like the Kubark Counterintelligence Manual, translated into Spanish, explicitly taught the use of psychological and physical coercion. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are declassified documents. This was a curriculum. When these generals returned to their home countries, they didn't just bring knowledge. They brought legitimacy. They returned with the absolute conviction that they were the last bastion of Western Christian civilization against the barbarism of communism. And when that bastion is attacked, no law is allowed to stand in their way. Fear is the greatest fuel for tyranny. And in the 1970s, Latin America was burning with fear. In Chile, Salvador Allende, a Marxist democratically elected by the people, begins nationalizing copper. In the eyes of Washington, and in the eyes of the Chilean elite, this is step one toward a second Cuba. In Argentina, Peronism and left-wing guerrillas are killing each other in the streets. In Uruguay, the Tupamaros movement is kidnapping and assassinating. Chaos. Uncertainty. And in the middle of that chaos, the military sees itself not as a breaker of the law, but as its savior. September 11, 1973. Santiago, Chile. The presidential palace, La Moneda, is bombed by Hawker Hunter fighter jets. Salvador Allende is dead. General Augusto Pinochet takes power. The world is shocked. But behind closed doors, in the dark rooms in Langley, Virginia, and at the Pentagon, there is a sense of relief. Chile has been saved. But saving one country is not enough. Because guerrillas, students, and journalists can flee across the border. If you arrest a terrorist in Buenos Aires, but he has contacts in Montevideo, the network is still alive. The Latin American generals realized one crucial thing. Their brutality, no matter how severe, had a physical limit. The national border. They needed a way to erase that border. They needed a system. Imagine a multinational corporation. But instead of distributing goods, they distribute death. Instead of using email or cloud servers, they use telex machines. This was Operation Condor. Officially launched in November 1975 at a secret meeting in Santiago, Chile. Present there, Manuel Contreras, the head of Pinochet's secret police, the DINA. And, according to documents declassified years later, a CIA operative named Michael Townley. The system was brilliant in its horror. Every member country of Condor had a central intelligence hub. They were connected by a dedicated, encrypted telex network. Security code, Condor. If Argentine intelligence captures a member of the ERP, the People's Revolutionary Army, and the prisoner confesses he has contacts in Uruguay, Argentine intelligence doesn't need to ask for formal extradition. That takes months of paperwork. No. They just send a telex message to the Condor hub in Buenos Aires. That message is relayed to Montevideo. Within hours, Uruguayan agents will arrest the target. And then they will disappear him. No trial. No record. No paper trail. This was the globalization of terror. And this network didn't just share prisoners. They shared technology. They shared interrogation methods. They even shared death flights. In Argentina, there was a place called ESMA, the Naval Mechanics School. Physically, it is a beautiful naval engineering academy with gardens and French-style architecture. Metaphorically, it is hell. In the basement of ESMA, prisoners were drugged. They were loaded onto military transport planes. The pilots would fly them out over the Rio de la Plata or the open Atlantic Ocean. The cargo door opens. They are pushed out. Still alive. Still drugged. They fall into the dark water. And they drown. There are no bodies. There are no graves. Only the fish and the ocean currents know where they went. This is the true meaning of desaparecidos. The disappeared. You cannot mourn someone who has no grave. You cannot demand justice for someone who legally does not exist. The state had created ghosts and forced their families to live with them. But Condor did not stop in Latin America. The network reached into Europe, into the United States. Because the exiles, the dissidents, they ran away. They went to Paris, to Rome, to Washington, D.C. And Condor hunted them. September 1976. Washington, D.C. Orlando Letelier, the former foreign minister of Chile under Allende, is walking to his car with his assistant, Ronnie Moffett. Letelier was a loud, vocal critic of Pinochet in exile. He was living proof that the Chilean resistance was still alive. Letelier gets into his car. He turns the ignition key. The bomb planted under his seat detonates. Letelier and Moffett are killed instantly. The perpetrator? Michael Townley, the Chilean DINA agent. The very same man who helped officially launch Operation Condor. Political assassination had happened in the backyard of the White House, in the capital of the world superpower. And this proved one thing: there is no safe haven. Operation Condor had a global reach. They had proven they could kill anyone, anywhere, without consequence. When the state takes a monopoly on violence, it also takes a monopoly on the truth. But there is one thing the dictator cannot control: a mother's love. In the midst of absolute despair, when all the media is gagged, when the churches are too terrified to speak, a group of women began to gather. In Buenos Aires, in front of the presidential palace, the Casa Rosada. Every Thursday, at 3:30 p.m. They walked in circles around the monument. They wore white cloth diapers on their heads, a symbol of their newborn children, who were stolen from them in the detention centers right before the mothers were disappeared. Las Madres de la Plaza de Mayo. They carried no weapons. They only carried photographs of their children. The military was confused. How do you shoot mothers who are just walking in silence? How do you disappear them without triggering genuine global outrage? These mothers became the conscience that forced the world to look. They proved that while you can kill the body, while you can crush bone and throw it into the sea, you cannot disappear the truth. But outside the Plaza de Mayo, in the air-conditioned rooms of New York and Geneva, there was a much larger question. Where was the law? We live in a post-World War II world. We have the UN Charter. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 2 of the UN Charter clearly states, all members shall refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. International law exists. The institutions exist. So why did 60,000 people still disappear? Because law, ultimately, is an illusion created by those who hold the guns. Operation Condor was quietly supported, funded, and protected by the United States. Henry Kissinger, the U.S. Secretary of State, gave the green light. Declassified documents show Kissinger telling the Argentine foreign minister, if there are things that have to be done, you should do them quickly. If the UN tries to condemn Argentina, the United States will use its veto power in the Security Council. If the U.S. Congress tries to cut funding because of human rights abuses, the CIA will lie to Congress, stating that the military junta is the only dam holding back communism. This is the greatest secret of the post-1945 world order. International law is real. But it only applies to weak nations. To nations that have no allies on the Security Council. For nations that sit inside the sphere of influence of an empire, the law is negotiable. Law is only for the weak. That single sentence is the epitaph for the 60,000 souls buried at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. They were not just killed by local dictators. They were killed by geopolitics. They were collateral damage in a game of chess where the kings can never be checkmated. The late 1980s. The Cold War ends. The Soviet Union collapses. Suddenly, the national security doctrine loses its enemy. Without the global communist threat, the Latin American military loses its excuse to rule. One by one, the countries return to democracy. Pinochet loses the 1988 referendum. The Argentine dictators fall after the Falklands War. Democracy returns. But what kind of democracy? When democracy returned, they faced the monster they had created. How do you put on trial soldiers who believe they saved the country? How do you jail generals who still hold the guns? In Argentina, there were trials. Some generals were convicted. But then, military pressure forced the government to pass amnesty laws. Ley de punto final. Ley de obediencia debida. Laws that essentially said, we forgive you. Forget the past. In Chile, Pinochet wrote a constitution that guaranteed him legal immunity. He even became a senator for life. In Brazil, the 1979 amnesty law forgave both sides. The torturers and the victims, legally, were treated as equals. Transitional justice, in reality, is often just delayed injustice. But truth has a way of surfacing. In the Atacama Desert, Chilean women are still searching for the bones of their children. They sift the sand through mesh screens, looking for a scrap of cloth, a fragment of bone. In Argentina, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights slowly begins to strike down the amnesty laws. Operation Condor, officially, is put on trial in Italy, in Argentina. Some low-level perpetrators are convicted. But the master architects? They died in their beds, old, rich, and free. However, The biggest question is not about the past. The question is the machine really dead? Or was it just upgraded? Operation Condor physically ended. The telex machines were replaced by encrypted servers. The CV-130 planes throwing people into the sea were replaced by MQ-9 Reaper drones. But the template? The blueprint? That is still here. It evolved. Let us look at how this template works in the modern era. Panama, 1989. Manuel Noriega. He used to be a CIA asset. He helped Condor. But then he became useless. He started playing both sides. What happens? The US media suddenly highlights his past as a drug trafficker. He is rebranded as a narco-dictator. And then 27,000 US troops land. Operation Just Cause. Thousands of Panamanians die. Democracy is restored. Iraq, 2003. Saddam Hussein. The exact same template. A leader who threatens US economic and geopolitical interests. The media and intelligence reframe the narrative, weapons of mass destruction. Terror. International law? Ignored. The UN Security Council? Bypassed. The invasion happens. Hundreds of thousands die. Democracy is exported. And now, look to the north of South America. Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro. An authoritarian leader whose economy is in ruins, who violates human rights. That is a fact. But Venezuela also has something else. The largest proven oil reserves on Earth. Larger than Saudi Arabia. And Maduro will not hand that oil over to American companies. What happens? The Condor template is activated. Step 1. Economic isolation. Sanctions that choke the ordinary citizen, creating a humanitarian crisis. Step 2. Reframe the narrative. Maduro is no longer just a corrupt leader. He is a narco-terrorist. He is indicted in federal court in New York. There is a $15 million bounty on his head. Step 3. Alternative legitimacy. Recognizing the opposition leader as the legitimate president. Step 4. All options are on the table. The veiled threat of military action. They don't need to send 27,000 troops like in Panama. They don't need to bomb La Moneda like in Chile. The technology has changed. Modern warfare doesn't always require boots on the ground. Modern warfare uses sanctions as bombs. It uses social media as propaganda. It uses international law selectively as a weapon. Venezuela might not be invaded tomorrow morning. But the blueprint is already on the table. If you have resources the empire wants and you refuse to bow, you become a target. You will be demonized. You will be isolated. And ultimately, you will be removed. Democracy is not killed by local dictators. Democracy is killed by a system that believes sovereignty is a privilege, not a human right. Venezuela isn't next. Venezuela is inevitable. Jacobo Timerman was finally released in 1979 after massive international pressure. He was exiled to Israel. He wrote a book about his experience. Prisoner Without a Name, Cell Without a Number. He died in 1999. But before he died, he realized one terrifying thing. That Operation Condor was not an anomaly. It was not a glitch in the system of liberal democracy. It was the system itself when its mask is taken off. We like to think of history as a straight line moving toward justice. That eventually, the right side wins. That the archives will be opened and justice will be served. But history is not a straight line. History is a pendulum. And right now, that pendulum is swinging back toward the shadows. In an era where truth is subjective, where international law is ignored by the most powerful, where technology allows us to spy on, track, and disappear someone without ever leaving a physical trace. We have to ask ourselves, have we truly learned from Condor? Or are we just waiting for our turn to be the prisoner in the cell without a number?